The Battle of Tarawa is often remembered for the relentless waves crashing on its beaches, the bullets flying overhead, and the soldiers fighting desperately for every inch of sand. But beneath that familiar surface lay a hidden labyrinth, a world almost no one saw during the battle, a network of tunnels and bunkers designed to be a fortress. The Japanese had spent years building this subterranean defense, carving reinforced chambers, hidden passageways, and interlinked rooms deep beneath the coral and sand. To an invading force, it seemed almost invisible, a shadowy mirror of the chaos above. As the first waves of Marines hit the beaches, they faced a defense unlike anything in the Pacific. Gunfire erupted from concealed positions, but what most did not realize was that the enemy was not just on the surface. They were below, in concrete reinforced chambers, waiting, breathing, and ready. These underground bunkers were more than mere shelters, they were traps. Many were designed with narrow entrances and thick steel doors that could be sealed from the inside. Soldiers who sought refuge from the chaos above often found themselves in rooms that would become tombs. Investigators would later discover that over 1,400 bodies lay in these chambers after the battle. Not all died from gunfire. Many succumbed to suffocation, some trapped behind sealed doors, others caught in collapsed tunnels. Entire sections of the bunker system were discovered flooded, the water mixed with debris and rubble, leaving no chance of escape. Some rooms showed no sign of struggle at all, suggesting that those inside had been overwhelmed by the collapse of their own defenses or the suffocating air, unable even to cry out. The design of these bunkers reflected the Japanese strategy at the time: hold the island at all costs. Reinforced walls and ceilings were meant to withstand artillery and explosives. Yet in that effort, the bunkers became double-edged. The very strength that was supposed to protect the soldiers also made it impossible for them to flee. When Marines used flamethrowers or demolitions to clear rooms, the fire and pressure within these confined spaces became lethal. Even a single blast could send shockwaves through the narrow tunnels, leaving no one alive to escape. The scale of what lay beneath the sand was staggering. Some of the larger chambers could hold dozens of men, yet when investigators finally entered, they found bodies stacked in impossible ways, the remnants of desperate attempts to survive. Items meant for survival, cots, rations, personal effects, were scattered, frozen in the moment of final panic. These bunkers were silent witnesses to fear, endurance, and ultimately, death. Tarawa's underground network reminds us that the horrors of war are not always visible. While the beaches saw open combat, it was below that the human cost became almost unimaginable. Entrapment, collapse, suffocation, and silence became as deadly as any bullet. The story of those hidden chambers is one of strategy turned tragedy, a dark mirror of the battle above, and a chilling reminder that in war, the safest place is not always safe at all.
As the battle raged above, countless Marines believed they were facing their deadliest threats on the beaches. Yet the real danger often lay beneath them. The Japanese bunkers, once meant as protective shelters, became prisons for those who sought safety underground. Soldiers squeezed into narrow tunnels and cramped rooms, hoping to escape the storm of artillery, gunfire, and flame. But the very design of the bunker system meant that refuge could quickly turn into entrapment. Many of the chambers were sealed from within, with steel doors and thick walls meant to protect against bombardment. Once inside, there was little chance of turning back. Soldiers tried to hide, to wait out the onslaught above, but the air quickly grew thick and heavy. Some chambers were poorly ventilated, while others were partially collapsed, cutting off any hope of escape. Investigators later found evidence that those who entered these bunkers often faced suffocation long before enemy fire could reach them. The Japanese had constructed interconnected tunnels that allowed small groups to move unseen, but for those who became trapped, the complexity of the network became a nightmare. Corridors twisted and branched unpredictably, some ending in dead ends or hidden chambers. Soldiers unfamiliar with the layout wandered into areas that became death traps. Many carried their weapons and packs, but these proved useless once the tunnels began to flood or collapse. Every step deeper into the bunker increased the risk, and for some, it became impossible to turn back. Above ground, flamethrowers, grenades, and demolition charges were tearing through the Japanese positions, but the sound below was muffled, almost distant. Inside the tunnels, men could hear explosions reverberate through the walls, feeling the shock waves push against their bodies in enclosed spaces. The pressure alone was enough to knock some unconscious. Others, pinned behind debris or doors, could do nothing but wait as oxygen levels dropped and the heat rose. The bunkers that were supposed to offer shelter became ovens, chambers where every breath was a struggle for survival. In some rooms, investigators later noted the eerie absence of resistance. Personal belongings remained neatly arranged, as if the soldiers had simply lain down to rest. But the truth was far darker. Many had collapsed from lack of air, unable to move, their final moments spent in silence. Other chambers bore the marks of frantic escape attempts, scratched walls, overturned equipment, and footprints pressed into the dirt, but still the tunnels swallowed them. Some areas were partially submerged, the mix of water and debris making movement impossible. Every attempt to flee often led deeper into the trap, a cruel design that left no mercy for those inside. For those trapped, there was no rescue, no mercy, only the slow, inescapable suffocation. The human cost of seeking refuge underground was staggering. Over 1,000 bodies were recovered from these hidden chambers, and while some had been killed directly by explosives or flame, the majority died as a result of the very places meant to protect them. Tarawa's bunkers transformed from strategic strongholds into lethal mazes, revealing a hidden horror few would ever imagine. By the end of the battle, it became clear that surviving the beaches was only the first challenge. For those who ventured below, the fight for life continued in silence, in darkness, in rooms that offered no escape. These underground spaces became a testament to the dangers of entrapment and a grim reminder that in war, hiding is often as deadly as facing the enemy. The air that should have preserved life instead stole it quietly, and the once hidden chambers became a tomb, leaving a haunting legacy for all who would later walk these blood-soaked sands.
The fight above the beaches was brutal, but beneath the sand, in the heart of Tarawa's bunker network, a different kind of battle unfolded, one that was claustrophobic, violent, and almost invisible. The Marines knew that taking the island meant confronting these underground strongholds, yet no map could fully prepare them for what lay inside. Narrow tunnels twisted in unpredictable ways, reinforced doors blocked access, and hidden chambers held soldiers who were trained, desperate, and determined. The bunkers were not merely hiding places, they were battlegrounds. Flamethrowers became the weapon of choice for clearing these dark spaces. The searing jets of fire forced Japanese soldiers from cover, but in the enclosed rooms, the flames created an oven-like heat that could kill within seconds. Explosions reverberated through the tunnels, turning reinforced walls into death traps, while shock waves from demolitions knocked soldiers off their feet, crushed lungs, and shattered ears. Blast pressure alone in these confined spaces became as deadly as any bullet. Even when the Marines breached the entrances, the effects of overpressure, smoke, and fire made progress slow and terrifying. Investigators later noted that some bunkers, when finally opened, were found to be charred, collapsed, and flooded, leaving no clear trace of how many had tried to survive. Personal belongings, weapons, and rations were scattered, often pressed into the walls or ceilings by the force of explosions. In some chambers, bodies were stacked in ways that suggested soldiers had tried to flee, but the tunnels swallowed them, leaving no escape. The confined space amplified fear. Every sound was magnified, every movement potentially fatal, and every corner could conceal a hidden enemy. Marines reported the disorienting nature of the underground fight. The tunnels were narrow, dark, and labyrinthine. Smoke and heat reduced visibility to almost nothing, and the roar of artillery above mixed with the echoes below, making it impossible to know where an explosion would strike next. Flamethrower operators had to crawl on hands and knees, aiming through thick smoke, aware that a single misstep could trigger a secondary collapse or ignite debris. The physical and psychological strain was immense. Even seasoned soldiers were overwhelmed by the combination of heat, pressure, and claustrophobia. The design of the bunkers contributed to the horror. Rooms meant to protect became lethal chambers when breached. Reinforced walls built to resist bombardment trapped soldiers inside when the roof collapsed or the air grew thick with smoke. Some chambers were partially flooded, mixing mud, water, and debris, making escape physically impossible. In other cases, the force of demolition charges sealed exits entirely, leaving the occupants with no chance of survival. The very strength of the Japanese defenses created a hidden toll, one that would only be understood once the tunnels were finally explored after the battle. The human cost of these underground engagements was staggering. Over 1,000 bodies were later recovered from the bunkers, and many showed the marks of heat, smoke, and blast, rather than direct gunfire. The Marines had fought not just an enemy, but the environment itself, a maze of darkness, fire, and collapsing stone. Each tunnel and chamber told a story of desperate struggle, of men attempting to survive in conditions that seemed almost designed to suffocate them. The underground assault at Tarawa was a battle of strategy and terror, one that combined planning with unpredictable chaos. It demonstrated how modern warfare in confined spaces could turn even the most fortified positions into death traps. Every charge, every flame, every blast pushed soldiers closer to exhaustion, testing not only their skill, but their will to survive. Tarawa's bunkers were conquered, but the cost was staggering, a grim testament to the lethal combination of human ingenuity and human suffering. By the time the tunnels were cleared, it was clear that the horror below had been as intense, if not more so, than the slaughter on the beaches. The underground fight revealed a side of war rarely witnessed, where survival depended not only on courage, but on endurance, ingenuity, and sometimes sheer luck. The flames, the pressure, and the collapse left no room for mercy. In the silence that followed, the walls themselves seemed to mourn the thousands trapped inside, a haunting reminder that in war, the deadliest battle may not always be the one you see. When the battle finally ended and the last echoes of gunfire faded across Tarawa, the true scale of the horror beneath the island began to emerge. The Marines had secured the beaches, raised flags, and taken control of the surface, but below, in the labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers, a grim discovery awaited. Investigators began the painstaking process of opening each chamber, revealing a scene that was almost unimaginable. Over 1,400 bodies were recovered from the underground network, soldiers who had perished not in open combat, but in silence, trapped by walls meant to protect them. Some bunkers were found sealed tight, with thick steel doors still latched, as if the occupants had resigned themselves to fate. Inside, men lay where they had sought refuge, their final moments frozen in the confined spaces. In other chambers, the aftermath of explosives and flamethrowers was evident. Charred walls, melted equipment, and bodies pressed into corners by the force of blasts. Investigators noted that many rooms bore no signs of struggle at all, suggesting that suffocation or collapse had claimed the lives of those inside long before enemy fire reached them. Flooded tunnels added another layer of terror. Water, debris, and collapsed ceilings combined to create environments from which escape was impossible. Soldiers had entered hoping to survive, only to be overwhelmed by a combination of heat, smoke, lack of oxygen, and structural failure. Some chambers were discovered with bodies stacked in impossible positions, evidence of men attempting to move or aid one another in their final moments. Every hallway, every doorway told a story of desperation and the cruel twist of fate that these bunkers had become prisons rather than shelters. The personal effects left behind were haunting. Helmets, rifles, rations, and letters were scattered across the floors, pressed into walls, or caught in debris. These items offered a glimpse into the final moments of those trapped. A soldier clutching a photograph, a group huddled together in fear, possessions abandoned in the hope of escape. The silence of the tunnels amplified the tragedy, a stark contrast to the chaos of battle above. It became painfully clear that for many, survival on the surface had been irrelevant. The underground network had claimed its victims quietly, efficiently, and mercilessly. The psychological toll on those who entered the bunkers after the battle was immense. Marines and investigators described the oppressive smell, the suffocating heat, and the eerie stillness that pervaded the tunnels. The sheer scale of loss was staggering, and the realization that these deaths were preventable added a layer of sorrow to the strategic victory. Some bodies were found in positions suggesting they had tried to barricade themselves or move through the tunnels, only to be blocked by debris or water. The bunkers, which had been intended to defend, instead had amplified the brutality of the conflict, turning every corner into a potential death trap. Examining the evidence, historians and military analysts later noted that the deaths inside these chambers were not simply collateral damage, they were a direct result of the design and tactics employed. Sealed rooms, reinforced walls, and intricate tunnel networks had created conditions where even a minor breach could become catastrophic. Flamethrowers, demolitions, and blast pressure worked with the architecture to leave little chance of survival. Tarawa's underground horrors became a case study in how strategy could inadvertently magnify human suffering, and how courage alone could not overcome the lethal environment. By the time the last chamber was cleared, the full scale of the tragedy was apparent. The 1,417 bodies recovered were a testament to the deadly combination of entrapment, collapse, suffocation, and silence. Tarawa had been won, but the human cost beneath the surface was almost unfathomable. Each tunnel and chamber stood as a silent witness to courage, fear, and ultimately death. The underground story of Tarawa revealed a reality of war that few had seen. The deadliest battle is sometimes the one that happens in the shadows, where survival is uncertain, and the silence speaks louder than any gunshot.
The Battle of Tarawa left scars that could be seen on the beaches, but the scars beneath the surface were far deeper and far more haunting. After the last bunker was cleared and the bodies removed, the scale of the tragedy began to reshape the understanding of warfare in the Pacific. Strategists, historians, and soldiers alike realized that the fight underground had been unlike any other, a battle where courage alone could not ensure survival, and where even the most carefully planned defenses could become instruments of death.
The story of Tarawa's bunkers forced a reevaluation of military tactics. Engineers studied the collapsed tunnels, flooded chambers, and sealed rooms, trying to understand how such fortified positions had transformed into deadly traps. Lessons were learned about the limits of protection, the dangers of confined spaces, and the unforeseen consequences of defensive architecture. The very features meant to preserve life, reinforced walls, interlinked corridors, and ventilation systems, had, in practice, often done the opposite. The battleground beneath Tarawa became a stark reminder that in war, every advantage can carry an unseen cost. For the men who survived both the beaches and the underground assault, the memory of what lay beneath remained vivid. They recalled the oppressive heat, the choking smoke, the deafening echoes of explosions, and the suffocating silence after the fire had passed. Even years later, veterans described the tunnels as a place where fear was a constant companion, and every step carried the possibility of sudden death. These memories were not just of combat, but of the human instinct to survive against overwhelming odds, of the terror of being trapped, and of the knowledge that escape was never guaranteed. Many spoke of the psychological burden that lingered long after the battle, a weight carried quietly for decades, a reminder that some wounds are invisible. Tarawa's underground network also left a grim legacy for future battles. Commanders in subsequent campaigns had to consider not only the enemy above ground, but what might be hidden below. The lessons learned influenced strategies in Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and beyond. Tunnel clearing, flamethrower tactics, demolition charges, and smoke ventilation became essential tools in the fight for fortified islands. Tarawa showed that victory required more than brute force. It demanded ingenuity, careful planning, and an understanding of the hidden dangers that lurked beneath the surface. Yet beyond strategy and tactics, the human story of the bunkers remained haunting. Over 1,400 lives were lost in silence, unseen by most of the world. Their deaths were a sobering reminder of the costs of war and of the fragility of life when humans confront both the enemy and the environment itself. The silent chambers beneath Tarawa were a monument to courage, desperation, and tragedy. Every tunnel, every sealed door, and every collapsed corridor carried the memory of those who had entered seeking safety, but instead found death. Even today, historians reflect on what happened beneath Tarawa, not just as a battle, but as a cautionary tale. War is often measured in victories and losses, in territory gained or enemies defeated. But the story of Tarawa reminds us that human lives are the true cost. The underground battle serves as a stark illustration of how strategy, engineering, and determination can collide with the unpredictability of reality. It is a lesson in humility, in respect for the dead, and in understanding that war is rarely as simple as it appears on the surface. The legacy of Tarawa also extends to the families of those lost. Letters, diaries, and photographs recovered from the bunkers told stories of ordinary men caught in extraordinary circumstances. Each artifact was a testament to human hope, love, and sacrifice, frozen in the final moments before tragedy struck. These personal remnants became more than evidence, they became voices from the past, insisting that the horrors of war be remembered accurately and never repeated. Ultimately, the hidden horror of Tarawa endures as a testament to the complexity of human conflict. The bunkers, tunnels, and chambers beneath the island became more than defensive structures. They became a mirror of the human experience in war, showing both ingenuity and vulnerability. The echoes of those lost in silence continue to remind us that beneath the victories and the flags raised on beaches, there are untold stories of fear, endurance, and sacrifice.
Tarawa's underground battle may have ended decades ago, but its lessons remain alive, haunting, and profoundly human, a somber warning of what happens when war's strategy meets the inescapable realities of life and death.